Hey, good morning, everybody. Welcome to another You Be the Behavior Consultant. I'm super excited for this topic, and I hope you are too. I'm just waiting to make sure that I am live, and hopefully you all can hear me. Let's see. Am I there? Are we there? There we are. Oh, good deal. And hopefully we have a few people joining us here in just a moment. There we go. I see some of my regulars. That makes me very happy. That means we're live. Yay! This is such an exciting topic. So before I jump into it all the way, let me go ahead and tell everybody what we're doing today. This is You Be the Behavior Consultant, a live stream I try to do most Mondays, and this is how it works. We have a topic for discussion, which we'll talk about in just a moment here. Oh, good. Loud and clear. Good. I've got some questions and discussion prompts. I don't really have video examples this week. I'm so sorry. But we are going to have a recap, of course, at the end. So here is the topic we're going to talk about today. We're going to talk about progressive, regressive, or stagnant. What does that mean? And we're going to apply that to some animal training frameworks. And I think this is really important because what I've been seeing, I'm going to turn down the volume here a little bit. I hear myself coming through on my phone, which is distracting. There we go. Because these frameworks, which are going to sound familiar to you once we start talking about them a little bit more, are getting a lot of attention lately. And to be honest, I think some people that I know have been talking about some of them for quite a while now, but recently there's been a lot of buzz. So I think it's really important that we evaluate them, or some of them at least, in today's live stream. And so hopefully using some of these words is going to help us do a little deeper dive and maybe do some evaluation, hopefully for maybe some good reason. So the questions I have for you to kind of kick us off here is, how might we define these words, progressive, regressive, or stagnant? We do kind of need some criteria there so we understand what we're talking about and why they matter for our animal training practices in the industry. And then what we're going to try to do is we're going to do a little exercise and see how we might apply them to these training frameworks that have been getting a lot of attention lately, and see how they can be evaluated for their directionality and their scientific integrity. I think that's really important for us. All right, so if you all are ready, we're going to try and dive in here. All right. So first of all, let's take a look at this word regressive and see how this aligns with maybe how you all think of the word. So regressive, basically, based on what I was looking at, I would say we can define that as maybe moving backward or returning to previous less advanced states or conditions. And so what might some of those features involve? So maybe they involve reversing or undoing progress, often associated with returning to older ways of thinking or doing things. And it can maybe imply a decline or deterioration in quality or effectiveness. So maybe to summarize that, regressive changes are typically viewed as steps backward. Okay, so there's a regressive word. Now let's take a look at progressive. So with progressive, we think about moving forward or advancing towards a more developed, advanced, or improved state. Some of those features might involve making progress, improvements, or advancements, often associated with innovation, reform, and desired changes. It can imply a movement towards a more modern or equitable or efficient ways of thinking or doing things. So maybe to kind of summarize that, progressive changes are typically seen as steps forward towards improvement and development. And then if we think about stagnant, maybe it's just not moving or changing, lacking development, progress, or activity. Some of those features, lack of movement or growth, can imply inertia, resistance to change, or lack of innovation may result in missed opportunities for improvement or adaptation. And so the direction is neither forward or backward. So stagnant is generally viewed as resistant to growth. So those are kind of our basic definitions. But then what I really wanted to think about is, how do those things impact what we're doing? And let me make this a little bit bigger for me so that I can read my little tiny words there. So what might regressive practices mean or look like, and how do they impact our animal training industry? So the practices might mean that we're going back to some old training methods, and some of those methods might involve evoking fear responses, stress responses, maybe aggressive responses. Maybe that means neglecting emerging evidence and understanding of animal behavior and welfare. Maybe it means relying more on anecdotes, there we go, and opinions rather than empirical evidence. And so maybe an example might be a regressive training approach focuses more on maybe stopping or reducing undesired behavior than building or reinforcing desired behavior. So maybe those training practices are focusing more on punishment or differential reinforcement of incompatible or alternative behaviors or exposure therapies or extinction procedures. So that might be a regressive approach compared to some of the things we tend to focus on more in some of the more progressive training practices these days. And so the impact might be potentially detrimental to animal welfare. So maybe somebody's using what works but may not fully understand why, or the potential fallout, or maybe what some of the other emerging alternative approaches might be. And so this can hinder growth and development for the industry and the industry-wide knowledge. And so it kind of keeps that industry from growing. Changes may undo progress and return to maybe something that was being used in the past. And so we're seeing a deterioration in progress. All right, no comments there yet so far. Don't worry, I've got some interactive stuff coming up here so you guys get to comment a little bit more. So if we're looking at progressive practices and their impact, so we're maybe looking more at emerging science and empirical evidence to advance our practices, maybe a little bit more emphasis on scientific rigor than those anecdotes and opinion pieces. We're kind of letting those kind of fall away a little bit more. So maybe an example might be some of the things that we've been looking at with offering multiple ways to access desired outcomes. So we call that genuine choice. Progressive training can potentially be more useful in mitigating fear and aggression and frustration because we're offering those multiple ways to access desired outcomes. And it also helps us reveal the many contingencies impacting the focal behavior. So that might be a progressive approach to animal training as an example. How does that impact animal welfare? It uses empirical evidence to support practices that improve animal welfare. It can enhance the animal's learning experience and welfare by considering their emotional and psychological needs. So how does it impact the industry? It promotes continued growth based on empirical evidence. It encourages changes to practices as new evidence emerges. So this approach tends to be have more evolvement, if that makes sense. Supports the scientific process to refine procedures and knowledge, so it's constantly changing. It doesn't kind of say, okay, we're only going to do it this way. It's okay to refine procedures and processes based on new knowledge that comes in, emerges. All right, and if we're following the stagnant practices, then we might see that we keep using those same training techniques that have been traditional without considering new or emerging research or developments. Maybe there's a lack of innovation or adaptation when we see something new coming out. You know, maybe there's some new evidence-based practices, but we're like, I'm just going to stick with what I'm doing. May include methods that are neither harmful nor particularly effective. So it may not be that it's necessarily bad or good. It's just that, well, I'm just going to stick with status quo just because that's the way I've always done it. So an example of perhaps a stagnant training environment that's persisting and promoting unsupported claims despite contrary evidence. You know, I think one we talk about a lot here is, you know, when somebody is saying that negative reinforcement is a procedure that's always bad, we know that it's really the application of that and understanding what is the maintaining desired outcome for the animal. So obviously, we often talk about not using contrived negative reinforcement where you're inserting an aversive stimulus to evoke a response. But if a behavior is being maintained by the animal wanting that aversive stimulus to be removed, then we might start with that procedure to give the animal the desired outcome it wants, and then hopefully eventually what's the word I'm looking for? Transition. There we go. Transition to positive reinforcement. Or we're seeing statements like parent-raised owls can't be trained, but often we're seeing those behaviors typically are being maintained by negative reinforcement. So that might be a situation where if you start with negative reinforcement, that parent-raised owl can be transitioned to positive reinforcement. or continuing to use metaphors like trust accounts, which we did a really great deep dive on that, where basically once we picked that apart, we were seeing that's really talking about superimposition. So that is a metaphor that typically doesn't really work for us. It's not about piling on more positive reinforcement over negative reinforcement. It's about addressing that negative reinforcement contingency so positive reinforcement can be effective. All right, so the impact, it limits the potential for improved training outcomes. It might miss opportunities to enhance animal welfare and training efficiency. It may lead to a plateau in the animal's learning and development, and the industry can remain stuck in these outdated methods or beliefs. If heavily pushed, this can have long-term impact and implications that are hard to change despite that overwhelming evidence for better practices. So there we go. So those are sort of these three the look at the practices and their impact under those three definitions there. So then if we just kind of look at an overall comparison of these three words, just again, sort of kind of summarizing it all, that regressive is reverting to outdated practices that may adversely impact animal welfare. Progressive is embracing new or emerging evidence-based methods that improve both the training process and the animal welfare. And stagnant is failing to evolve or improve, maintaining a status quo that may not always be harmful, but also lacks the benefits of new or emerging approaches. All right, so that's kind of our, laying the groundwork for these words. And I kind of wanted to introduce those because that's kind of going to set us up for what we're going to do next. What I really wanted to talk about is these animal training frameworks. And some of these may be familiar to you, some of them may not. I'll kind of introduce them to you so they're not completely foreign if you haven't heard them before. But okay, we got much of the horse world is regressive. I am the weirdo for training my horses with treats. Yeah, and I think it's helpful to have these words in our vocabulary and have a little bit of understanding what they mean. I think it's informative, and then as we go through this exercise here, I think you'll hopefully find it useful. So what I wanted to do was sort of apply that thought process to these frameworks, these animal training frameworks, and some of you might be familiar with them. So we've got LIMA, one that was just announced called Free. Life, which is not that old, that was introduced a couple years ago. And then if you've been hanging out in our circles here, we've talked about the constructional approach for a while. And each framework represents a different approach to behavior and interventions. But what I really wanted to talk about is that not all these frameworks are created equal. And what we're going to kind of do is compare them and evaluate them and think about, what scientific foundations support each model. How do these approaches align with that functional individualized training that we often talk about is really important to a behavior analytic approach? And then I also want us to think about how do these approaches really align with these words that we just defined? Are they regressive? Are they stagnant? Are they progressive? And that's why it was really important to me that we kind of defined those terms as well as we did. And so for us, it's not only important to identify what these frameworks say, and we'll try to get into that a little bit more, but to critically evaluate how they shape our training decisions. Do they advance or hinder progress? And I think as scientific practitioners, which is what I think we are, our quest is to assess not only what's popular or widely adopted, but really what is functional, evidence-based, and ethically sustainable. And so some of these are more well-known than others. And so I want you to keep that in mind. But I think one of the things that I really have observed over the years is that I think people, at least in the circles in which I've communicated, have had questions about some of these. And maybe they've spoken about them quietly and, privately and maybe not very publicly. And then, there have been some more public communications about some of them. But I think there have been questions for a while. And this, I think today is going to be a really nice opportunity to dive into and really ask the right questions. I've noticed, yes, on social media, because the free model has just been announced, and so you may not have had an opportunity to really explore this. There's been a lot of buzz on the internet, but I think maybe the wrong questions are being asked, or the wrong statements are being made. It's not really evaluating the model. I think people are looking at some other things, but what we're going to do today is evaluate the model. So a brief overview of the models, very brief, and then we'll get a little bit more detailed. LIMA, the acronym is least intrusive, minimally aversive. It does promote a hierarchical approach to procedure selection, but one of the things that has been pointed out is that it lacks functional assessment and individuality in the description. Free, which is a new one that was just announced a couple days ago. And I would say LIMA tends to be something that's been adopted by several trade organizations. Free was recently announced by IAABC, so the Behavioral Consulting Trade Organization. And for those of you that follow or are members of Animal Training Fundamentals, I have the references available for you if you want to go look these up in more detail. Read the full papers. So FREE stands for Functional, Reinforcing, Enriching, Effective. It emphasizes reinforcement-based strategies and the avoidance of coercion. However, it does not provide operational definitions or clear guidance on procedure selection based on function. LIFE, this was a paper and acronym provided by Eddie Fernandez, who is a professor in, I want to say he's at Melbourne University. I'm sorry, Eddie, if I got the university wrong. Anyway, in Australia. And LIFE is an acronym for least inhibitive, functionally effective. And it encourages the use of function-based interventions and procedures that support effective outcomes and well-being. It offers valuable concepts, but lacks an applied process for selecting and implementing procedures. And the constructional approach, introduced by Israel Golddiamond, and the seminal paper that goes with that was published in 1974 and updated in 2002, focuses on building new functional behavior repertoires by arranging conditions where desired behaviors contact reinforcement, prioritize individual analysis, degrees of freedom, and designing multiple paths to desired outcomes rather than eliminating undesired behavior. So it's very focused on building behavior, not focused on reducing behavior. The framework that guides effective procedures at selection as well as okay, so there's a framework that the five. They're not really steps, but there's a framework that guides effective procedure selection as well as optimizes welfare. So those are sort of the four frameworks that we're kind of comparing here. So now that's a very brief overview. And what I've got here is a chart that I know is very detailed, but what it kind of does for us is it kind of compares all of these across different dimensions. And we kind of already hit the core philosophies over there, the first thing. So I don't think I'm going to go over that first row there. But I think we do want to look at these other rows. And I know it's a lot to look at, but it's good that we do look at them because we are going to go through some exercises here. So I think we want to look at the ethical bias, and we'll just kind of go through each column here. So for LIMA, it's, like I said, many trade organizations kind of follow the LIMA approach. And keep in mind that the model was kind of originally rooted in sort of child education models. Free, which is the new thing that just was put out, its process is kind of promoting freedom, but the problem with their references, and we are going to get into reference integrity in a little bit here, is a lot of its references are not really empirical. So they're more kind of opinion-based references. So they're, and sort of humanistic in their approach. So their references are a little challenging. And then the life one is ethical training defined as that is effective and minimally inhibitory, is what is defined there. And just to help you understand, how did I come up with these charts? So this is one of the things I think is really valuable about AI these days. You can upload all these documents and basically ask AI to give you these kinds of comparisons. So this isn't really me sort of saying, here's my opinion. I basically asked AI to do the analysis for me and said, hey, can you compare these dimensions for me? And so it does that for me. So it's not me kind of giving you these words. This is really what AI can do for you. So it's really lovely, because I would say back when I first started thinking about some of these frameworks, I think what's really interesting is I remember questioning, especially LIMA, but I didn't, at the time, I didn't have enough knowledge, for one. I just had a feeling that there was something that wasn't working for me about this framework, but I didn't really know how to articulate it. I would listen to others who had more knowledge than me, who would say there were some things that were not correct, but again, I wasn't in a position to articulate it. As I learned more, I was able to articulate it better. But again, I don't think I was fully in a position where I could evaluate it to the extent that was needed. And later on, I got better and better and better at it. But then I think one of the really beautiful, valuable things about AI is that now you can take all these documents, and deliver them all into a program and several programs. So if you are not confident with what one program gives you, there are many AI programs that you can ask, can you evaluate these programs on these criteria? And you can compare and contrast that. And then if you keep getting the same answer from multiple different AI programs, then you can feel somewhat confident that, okay, the information within this one and this one and this one is consistently this. So I just want to kind of share that this is not, just my opinion. This is sort of kind of a summary that AI is giving me of these different documents for you. All right. And so then back to the constructional approach, it's basically what AI is telling me is that ethicality is embedded in the design. And that basically comes from that the organisms have genuine choice through multiple pathways for reinforcement. Then if we look at training progression, okay. And Alex says Notebook LM is my favorite AI tool right now. Yeah, that one I find not as intuitive, I must admit, but it's definitely a good resource. There's several good ones for doing academic work, I do find, so that's nice. But yeah, there's quite a few good ones out there. You just have to decide, which ones you want to give it a go. But yeah, definitely Notebook LM is one of them. All right. What else do we have here? Training progression. So for LIMA, the hierarchy is basically the tool that is promoted in that one. And then for free, the definitions are kind of vague. The shift focus from freedom from coercion is basically what it recommends, but how do you get to freedom from coercion is not really defined. So we don't really know how do you get there. Life encourages selecting procedures based on effect and functional outcomes and avoiding hierarchy. So that is their suggestion there. And then for the constructional approach, it emphasizes using nonlinear contingency analysis and building of skills from existing repertoires and alternative operants. So basically giving animals, choices. And reduction procedures are considered obsolete. We're not going to focus on that. So that's kind of the training recommendations. Oh, more comments. Wow, wow, AI is getting better. Hopefully, yeah. You just kind of got to dive in and start using it to really see the potential of what you can do with it. I understand there's controversy and it could be used for evil, but if you want to take advantage of it for good, there's lots of potential. So let's look at the scientific basis. So for LIMA, it's a lot of it is derived from educational literature, or more like text behavior analytic, I want to say like textbook type stuff, not necessarily behavior analytic experimental tradition, so not empirical stuff. Free lacks empirical references. It includes a lot of humanistic and speculative assumptions, and we'll get more into this in the reference integrity. The life one frames itself as behavior analytic, but remains a little bit conceptually abstract. And then the constructional approach is rooted in radical behaviorism, which might be a new term for people. We'll save that for another day. And it's validated through experimental analysis of behavior, which basically means that the studies are much more rigorous, to put it a little bit more concise. Concept of control, which we did a whole live stream on that, which again is in our resources section on this particular live stream. It's often in LIMA, it's often interpreted through the humane hierarchy, so it's very loosely defined. And then the free framework, it suggests animals seek control as a primary reinforcer, which again, if you listen to our live stream we did on that, I would consider that a misinterpretation of control and behavior analytic principles. So again, I would go back to that live stream to get a better handle on that. Life proposes minimally inhibiting control, but offers no rigorous behavioral definition. And I think Eddie had proposed doing another follow-up to this article, so maybe you would get into that more later. I don't know. The constructional approach, control is defined by degrees of freedom. So true control, genuine choice exists when multiple paths to reinforcement are constructed. All right, so now I know it's a lot to take in. Don't worry, you get to do some fun stuff in a little bit here. All right, so now we're going to talk about some more things. So let's talk about focus on reinforcement. So for LIMA, it prioritizes positive reinforcement. Use of negative reinforcement is discouraged or it's delayed. So you might have to go through a lot of other steps before you actually use what might be the functional procedure for that intervention. Free advocates for reinforcement, but it poorly differentiates between procedures and outcomes. And then life allows both negative and reinforcement when functionally effective. And then the constructional approach allows all reinforcement types. It's focusing on what's functional, not the topography. So if it's appropriate to use negative reinforcement because that's what the animal wants, then that's fine. Application and practice. LIMA is used widely in certification programs. We know it's quite popular. I think even the authors of it have acknowledged that it has been misapplied as a recipe rather than individualized. And that is a concern of theirs. And I think that is a concern of critiques of the LIMA framework. Free may reinforce oversimplified views of behavior change. Life, it's still emerging. Implementation strategies are under development. I think that was one of the wordings in the actual document that they didn't actually talk about how to apply procedures or develop procedures necessarily. And then the constructional approach, the application is tailored to each individual case. It relies on systemic and individualized assessment of contingencies and outcomes. So that one is really probably the most developed in terms of, how do you apply it to an individual. Flexibility and individualization. LIMA is limited by that hierarchical structure. Individualization is not really very emphasized with that hierarchy. It's talked about. I mean, I certainly remember it being talked about that is supported, but it doesn't really seem to be realistic with the hierarchy. Free, the framework is static despite claiming flexibility. And then with life, greater emphasis is on that functional analysis and situational variability. So life definitely is very much, look for functional procedure, or try to be functional in your selection of procedures, although it doesn't tell you how to select procedures. And then constructional approach is highly individualized based on the unique contingency arrangements for each animal and environmental unit. All right, technical precision. LIMA often uses ambiguous or borrowed terminology from other disciplines, so a little less scientific there. Free uses behavior sounding terms but lacks operational definitions, often inconsistent. Life attempts to use behavior analytic terms but blends in humanistic language. And constructional approach grounded in precise definitions of reinforcement, behavior, stimulus conditions, and contingency arrangements. And then training. Oh, no, sorry. I can't read that to you. That's for later. All right. So we're getting farther down the line here. So now I do want to go over reference integrity, and then we're going to get into a little interactive activity. So this one to me is really important. And I know we've talked about it before when we talked about sorting journal article gems from junk. So I do look at references, and I encourage our industry to do so as well. Because some of the widely cited sources in some of these things can not really be peer-reviewed empirical studies, but opinion-based writings. And I often see people, repeat those as like, well, this is the proof that, what's being said here is the truth, so to speak. But their inclusion does not equate to scientific rigor. And especially when they're used to justify these procedural models. And so this is another chart I've put together for you because I think it's really, really important, because I can't tell you how many times, how many times I've seen people be like, oh, this is valid because it was written. And, we know that, we have to be critical thinkers. Let's see, what does Alex say? Would the constructional approach be more popular if it had an acronym? Oh, that's a great question, huh? Another acronym for us to remember. Well, I'm going to let you work on that. I don't know if I can think of a good one. I'm already getting confused with these three at the top of my charts here. All right, so now we're going to look at reference integrity across these different models here. Okay. So here are the types of references used for LIMA. It uses industry position statements, educational hierarchies, and conceptual writings that are not peer-reviewed or empirically tested. Oh, CATS, Constructional Approach Training System. Well, there is the constructional aggression treatment, and there is, a constructional exposure therapy, CET. What else have we had that are for constructional approach stuff? It's confusing, that's for sure. Let's see. Free uses conceptual essays, internal documentation, and sources rooted in humanistic psychology rather than behavior analysis. Life includes behavior analytic and functional litter, some empirical references present, though mix of peer-reviewed and conceptual sources. And I would say for life, though, one thing AI probably did when it's saying that is that some of the references had to be some of the ones from LIMA because it was discussing LIMA in it. So I don't know if when AI was saying that, the mix is a fair assessment. So we have to be kind of conscientious of that. Because life also kind of does an overview of what's been done in the past. Constructional approach relies on peer-reviewed and empirical studies, experimental behavior analysis, and nonlinear contingency analysis literature. The examples of the sources cited, I don't necessarily need to read all of those for you. You can go to the papers and go see what those exact examples are. But I will say, what I do notice on some of them, again, is that, general ABA textbook, we see under LIMA. Again, in free, we see some of the references that were that we talk about in the control live stream that I did, that I said were really not empirical studies that were being used to promote the idea that control is a primary reinforcer, when we're saying, it's really, the way it's being used is as a construct. So some of those things are worth considering, whereas we see, for the constructional approach, it's mostly peer-reviewed empirical studies, things of that nature. Okay, so the scientific weight of these references. So again, I would say for LIMA, AI would say for LIMA that the scientific grounding is indirect and borrowed from outside behavior science. For free, few references are peer-reviewed or empirically grounded. For life, stronger scientific basis than LIMA or free, and that for the constructional approach, the strongest empirical foundation among all models. And then let's look at application of evidence in practice. So for LIMA, functional analysis or assessment, I would say also, is rarely applied. And then for free, the model lacks a foundation in behavior analytic practice. And life aims to apply functional analysis. And then constructional approach, scientific references are applied functionally. And then if we were to look at overall reference integrity, LIMA is heavily concept-driven, weakly supported by scientific literature. Free, scientifically weak overall. Empirical support is minimal, and references are largely conceptual and non-behavioral. Life, higher integrity than LIMA or free. And again, the constructional approach demonstrates the highest level of scientific integrity. So I think all of those are significant and important for us to acknowledge. Oh yeah, and then Alex offered CAF, constructional affection. Yeah, so there are some acronyms for the constructional approach to think about. All right, so there you go. I've given you all a lot of background. Now, hopefully you memorized all that, right? Because I thought what we would do for fun, let's see if my computer remembered this. Yes, it did. Okay, good. I'm going to give you a couple things you can play with here. We're gonna do a little fun quiz if you want to. I've put the form in the chat if you want to go to a link. You might have to open it in a separate browser, or it might move you away from the page here. But you can also scan the code if you want to do it on a phone or something. So you've got two options. So if you're on your computer, you can grab the link that's in the chat, or you can scan the code with your phone, and it should take you to a Google form, and we can do a little fun quiz together if you want. And we've got some questions here, and we can kind of go through these questions together if you want. So our first question here is, which framework is grounded in peer-reviewed empirical research and experimental behavior analysis? So that's the first one. Hopefully you're playing along. And if you don't want to answer on the Google form, you can certainly, throw your answers in here. But then, of course, everybody's going to see your answer. So that's our first question. And as you take the quiz in the Google form, once you've submitted all your answers, you're going to be able to see if your answers were correct or not. And then here is our next question, our next two. Which framework relies primarily on internal documents and conceptual essays rather than published studies? Do you remember? And then which framework lacks individualized function-based intervention and application due to its recipe type approach? So that's our next two questions. Hopefully everyone's thinking away there. Thinking away. And you can tell me to slow down or go back if I'm going too fast. Okay. And which framework rebrands LIMA but offers minimal functional or scientific advancement? So that's our question number 4. And then our next one is, which framework emphasizes building behavior repertoires through nonlinear contingency analysis? So that's our next question. Hopefully these are, all of it is depending on like how familiar you are with these frameworks, and hopefully I gave you enough background. All right. And now we're on number 6. which framework aims to select procedures based on functional effectiveness and minimal inhibition? Okay, and so now hopefully this is where we're going to tie it all together with our initial part of our live stream. Hopefully it ties together. So which word best describes LIMA? Is it regressive, stagnant, progressive, or potentially progressive? Which one do you think best describes LIMA after we went through all that? And then which word best describes free? Is it regressive, stagnant, progressive, or partially progressive? And then which word best describes life? Is it regressive, stagnant, progressive, or potentially progressive? And then there's one more. Which one best describes the constructional approach? Regressive, stagnant, progressive, or potentially progressive? And so if you are taking this quiz on the form, you should be able to see your results, how you did on the quiz. And it should give you the answers. All right. Hopefully everybody had enough time. Because I'm going to go to this slide. So hopefully I was able to give you enough information. And if so, let's see. If I knew where you're going to quiz me, I might have read along a little more effectively or more attentively. So close. I know I didn't really say there was a quiz day, but you know what? It's all in fun. It's really just to get us thinking a little bit. I mean, that was really my goal here, is to kind of get us thinking. And of course, you know, this is a recording as well, so you can watch it again. And it's a lot of information to take in, and obviously I've had some time to really dissect it all and really look at it. But, you know, I think for me, what was really a fun exercise about going through all these and, you know, reading the I don't know what you'd want to call them, papers or frameworks, and, you know, evaluating the frameworks in detail, is I think it helped to ask the right questions about these documents. You know, what I'm seeing people arguing about is who wrote what and who gets credit for what. But I think the right questions to ask are, what's the value of these things? You know, are they valuable to us, and in what ways? And really, you know, what I kind of determined by, you know, digging a little bit deeper is that, you know, the thing that was always bothering me about LIMA that I couldn't articulate years ago, but I think we're finally now in a place where people are, you know, are starting to speak up more. You know, I think, you know, Eddie, you know, and I had conversations before he wrote Life, you know, and he pointed out some of the things that were important to address, you know, like the lack of individuality, the function, you know, that the function-based issues. You know, I think, you know, and those conversations were happening prior to that paper from other people, you know, but nobody was really talking about it very publicly. So I think one of the things that, you know, AI was also helpful in being able to put into a chart is that I think it is, you know, LIMA is regressive. It returns to outdated tools. You know, I think a hierarchy isn't really a helpful, you know, tool to create procedures or interventions. And And I have said that in my presentations publicly. I know other people have said it in their presentations publicly, and, we were critiqued for that. But I think we are finally at a point where, people are saying, okay, you know what, this is regressive. It limits our growth through linear thinking. There's an emphasis on some reduction procedures. Maybe people had a difficulty seeing that in the past. But we're getting better at starting to see that, maybe, DRIs and DROs are not a better thing when, an animal may want, distance as a reinforcer. I wouldn't choose that before. Positive reinforcement can be coercive when an animal really wants distance as a reinforcer. So going through a hierarchical approach is really not a progressive. In fact, it can be regressive. So I think we are now at a place where we can have those conversations a little bit better. So to me, using this analysis and looking at these frameworks is helping us have the right conversations. And then, unfortunately, I know this was, a newly published thing. I don't know that the free model is necessarily an improvement. It's a change. I think it's great that it's a change, but maybe it's just a stagnant change. It's not really moving forward nor moving backward. It's just sort of kind of hovering in the same places, so to speak. So maybe it's repackaging LIMA a little bit, and it kind of appears progressive, but it's not really moving the needle, so to speak. And again, it's kind of lacking any of that scientific accuracy. So it kind of sounds nice, but I don't know that we're definitely making any great progress there per se. Okay, great. I'm glad there's, it's a step better. It's not regressive, but it's maybe just kind of staying in the same places. I don't know what else to say about that one so much. I think life was potentially progressive, and I think that's what AI really kind of acknowledged there, in that the fact that it did try to acknowledge that we need to look at the function of the behavior and try to be more individualized. So it could become progressive with more refinement, but as is acknowledged in the paper, it's not really providing sort of that assistance with developing procedures. And I think one of the things that does help us with when we compare it to the constructional approach is that all the tools are kind of already there with the constructional approach. It gives us a way to help us develop individualized function-based interventions. It really is focusing on building new repertoires. It's about expanding learner skills, and it maximizes benefits with minimized harms and promotes sustained growth and development. So I think that was really the benefit of kind of doing this sort of analysis and evaluation of these frameworks. So, maybe we're in a position where we can, really move forward, instead of fighting over, models and frameworks, and just really evaluate them for their worth and who gets credit for what. Let's just move forward and use the frameworks that are going to best serve our animals. So there you go. So that's kind of what was the point of kind of getting a definition for these words and then maybe applying them to these models. So I'm going to kind of take us to the recap, I think. So regressive, progressive, and stagnant, these sounds like concepts we should instinctually recognize, but when we apply them thoughtfully to real-world challenges in our animal training field, I think they reveal something much deeper. They help us evaluate not just what we're doing, but whether our practices are truly moving forward. So it's often easy for us to just accept information at face value, especially when, somebody is so like, this is the best thing ever. Or maybe if like somebody who's really, has a great platform and podium, and, are telling you it's the best thing ever. And if it's been shared widely, if you've got a lot of people sharing it widely, it can be really appealing. But when we pause to ask critical questions, like, is it based on empirical evidence? Is it supporting change? Is it resisting it? Or is it moving forward or even backwards? We gain powerful insight into how our field is evolving. So maybe rather than relying on opinion or anecdotes, we can assess the quality of the reference material, examine how procedures are selected, and determine which direction a framework is really taking us, progressive, stagnant, or regressive. So this kind of scrutiny helps us avoid embracing ideas without analysis and instead make thoughtful, evidence-informed decisions that elevate our training practices. So if something strikes you as off, which is what happened to me all those years ago, I just knew it was off. And I was so grateful when somebody with more knowledge than me in the room said, that's not right. And again, I didn't have the words at that time. And this was, so this was back when the Art and Science of Animal Training Conference was still going on. So this was, before 2020. So it had to be like 2017, 2018, 2019. Can't remember the exact year, but I remember I just had to sit there quietly and listen because I didn't have enough knowledge to, contribute to the conversation. I just sat there and listened like, oh, someone else thinks it's wrong. And this is a, really smart behavior analyst, and so I was like, yay. But, trust that instinct and dig deeper. I mean, so, think about it. Here, now we're in 2025. So we're talking at least 6 or 7 years before I feel like, I can maybe speak publicly about, how I had those feelings I had way back then. But, we can evaluate that material and ask, what direction is this taking us? The question alone can help us shape a better path forward for our industry. And, and who knows, another 5 years from now, hopefully we're going to have, more things to say about these things. So, Cynthia loves the comparison of the models. Yeah, and I think there's going to be more comparisons too. And hopefully, more changes, more things that we, can explore and evaluate. So resources that can help you look at this a little bit more. So I mentioned the journal article, Sorting Journal Article Gems from Junk. I still think that is such a great live stream we did because it really helps you understand all the different kinds of resources out there, how to really discern what's a good resource, what's one that you might have to think a little bit more about. We do have a great live stream on the constructional approach to animal training, so a bigger, deeper dive on that topic. And then we just did the one on understanding control in animal training. And then this one's from 2021. I did one on least restrictive, least intrusive, minimally aversive. So I kind of dive deeper into those words because those words can be very confusing. How do we define them? So those are all some additional resources you might appreciate to help you kind of get a more understanding of some of the things we talked about today. Other things coming up are, speaking of great behavior analysts who help me understand this stuff better, Joe Lang and Paul Andronis are going to be in London in June. And last I heard, this is almost full. So for the live portion, live on site portion, but you can attend virtually if you would like to. So I do encourage you to go to the website there and reserve your spot. We are very excited about this. Another opportunity to learn from these really fantastic speakers, knowledgeable people who have, completely changed the way that I train animals. So I encourage you to join us there. If you liked this information, I do appreciate the attribution and, of course, sharing the information. Other ways you can support us, we've got some cool merchandise. I'll show you the shirt I'm wearing today in a moment here. Other ways to support us, share our newsletter, share the videos, become a member of Animal Training Fundamentals. If you do, you can get credentials. You can get recognized for all the things that you study here. And here's how you can join, by the way. Go to animaltrainingfundamentals.com. We have a monthly individual option. You get a 20% savings if you join for the annual option. And then our best deal is the facility option, where you can have up to 200 sub accounts for a good price. And then if the full site is just not your style, we do have a YouTube membership option where you can watch things ad-free, and that has just been launched. So if you go to the YouTube site, you'll see a membership option there too. All right, and I'll show you the shirt that I've got on today, Fighting for Degrees of Freedom. And then I don't know if you can see the back, but it says Join the revolution? I don't know. I don't know if you can see that. Anyway, so that's that. All right, there you go. That's all the cool new stuff happening now. Let's see. Cool. All right, I was watching myself on there to see if the back of the shirt showed up, and it did. Cool. All right. Well, I hope that was an interesting discussion for you all. Like I said, that is a topic that has been on my mind for years. Some discussions take years to actually evolve and get to the surface where we can all maybe have a conversation about them. So I hope that was, I love the shirt. Yeah, so the way you can design them, you have to pick both the front and the back, but you'll see it on the merch shop when you do that. But anyway, you know, so like I said, it's a conversation that's been years in the making, and I am actually really happy that people are talking about it more, you know, and doing some critical thinking skills, and you're using their critical thinking skills to evaluate these frameworks, and maybe, you know, getting to a point where they're like, oh, okay, you know, instead of just automatically accepting things without evaluating them a little bit deeper. So hopefully maybe that helps people think a little bit more critically, and, you know, take advantage of AI. Do your own analysis, upload those documents yourself, and ask the questions and see what it comes to, what information it gives you. And like I said, there's a lot of different AI programs that can help you do those those different types of analytics, and see if you come up with similar information as I did. I have a feeling you will. All right. So Cynthia says this was fantastic. Thank you so much. A lot of work went into this talk. Yeah, like I said, it's been a few years, and a few papers, including some heavy duty research over the years, but finally coming together. All right. Well, look at that. We're just about at the top of the hour. I appreciate y'all being here. And again, a deep thinker. You might have to revisit this one again, but I hope it helps with some of the conversations that are going on about these topics. I don't know that it's so much about, you know, who gets credit for what. I think really the bigger question is, you know, how do these frameworks serve us and our animal training industry? I think that's the bigger question. Thank you for doing these live streams. I'm trying to attend them because I always learn a lot, and I always want to improve the lives of my horses and parrots. Well, thank you so much. That's a wonderful, wonderful compliment. And yeah, me too. I like that. I like trying to do that as well, trying to improve the lives of our animals. All right. Well, that sounds like a wonderful note to end on. So with that, I hope you all have a great day, and I'll look forward